So if you don't learn anything else today, just remember this. Normal types are very overpowered, at least in the context of a metagame where your normal resist gets nuked by secondary coverage, and your fighting types get outsped and one-shot. This is the reality of fighting Norman in Pokemon Run&Bun. It is the most popular and arguably hardest difficulty game out there. At the time of this recording, only 46 people have completed a hardcore Nuzlocke of this game. And this gym leader sits at the most pivotal point of a Nuzlocke challenge, where many people wipe losing hours if not days of progress, or continue on merely to advance to the next calc-inducing fight, and maybe having to sacrifice many team members to this fight. This fight is a microcosm of a game that's littered with over 400 fights. It has a complex AI system that the player has to make crucial risk-reward decisions and manage very limited resources. But it is what I believe to be the most crucial gym leader in the game, and what most consider to be the hardest. In this video, we'll go over why this is the case, and what makes this fight so terrifying to Nuzlockers. But we're also going to go over what strategies can be used to stop Dad's evil plans. And if you want more Run&Bun content like this, let me know in the comments. Now, taking a look at Vanilla Emerald, Norman is known to be slightly hard, but nothing too crazy. The flaws are pretty obvious. You can use Truant Abuse on the Slacking with something like Protect or the move Dig. You can alternate what you click based on what turn Slacking attacks you, because with Truant, it just can't attack you 50% of the time. Linoon is also pretty easy, as most Pokemon you have can easily hit it for over 50% to negate Belly Drum. And also, no resist completely wall his Pokemon. Something like Aeron or Graveler will just invalidate this fight. And trust me, non-stab Feint Attack is doing virtually nothing. And this makes Norman very one-dimensional. It really just relies on its normal stab moves to make progress against you, but that really doesn't work too well. However, Run&Bun just throws this completely out the window. None of these concepts exist here. Pokemon as a whole and what we've experienced is completely warped, and rather we are dealing with the need to individually counter the variety of coverage moves, stats, and abilities, and they each require their own archetype of Pokemon in a game with tons of variety. And we can view this fight in the lens of what Pokemon or tools the player has access to, and what AI quirks differ from vanilla. And this forces the player to play differently than they would in vanilla. See, the Pokemon in this game that you play against are way smarter than you would face in a vanilla game. It is coded to switch smarter, click better moves against you, and this creates a lot of complexities. We will go over some of these cases, but also there's a flip side to this. Are there any of these AI quirks that the player can abuse? So this gym leader is what most top Run&Bun players would consider the breaking point of a run. It almost feels like once you get past Norman, the run is in your control. You get more Pokemon and freedom to play more safely. You get a lot of encounters after this gym leader, there's a lot of Pokemon that evolve after this gym leader, and there's more freedom to play safely after this gym leader generally. And there's a phrase that I once heard that said, fraud your way through Norman, then optimize your way through Elite Four. Meaning here, relative to other fights in the game, we are dealing with many variables out of our control. As a skilled Nuzlocker, your goal is to control all the variables, minimize the risk, and perform consistent lines. Here, one poorly timed crit from Doggersby, Hurricane Confusion from Pidgeot, or Body Slam Paralysis from Meloetta, or merely not rolling a Cinccino answer can just spell disaster, and sometimes there's not much you can do. Additionally, sacrificing Pokemon here is almost mandatory to keep a run from dying. But even with the concept of sacrificing to maintain momentum, it's just a matter of sheer power combined with the various RNG aspects that boost the odds in the AI's favor. So when looking at each Pokemon individually, we will use the lens of seeing them in a vacuum, but eventually the hope is to see them as a whole as it all works together. Some of the Pokemon you bring to a fight might be able to counter one and then chip another. Or maybe you have a Pokemon that is not very good for this fight because sure, it can beat a Pokemon, but maybe you bait in something that you don't want it to. And maybe you bring a Pokemon to this fight that is pretty bad in the rest of the game and you're okay with it dying. There's all these complexities to consider in a typical run. But we're going to do our best here to try and generalize the Pokemon you have to face on this fight. Starting with Norman's lead Porygon 2. Finding a good Porygon 2 lead answer is far from guaranteed in a run, but there are common counters. This Pokemon hits really hard with Ice Beam and Tri-Attack. You need powerful enough offense to kill through Recover, or you need defensive strategies like Toxic Stalling or Defense Lowering to get through Eviolite. But also, Porygon has the ability Download, which gives a boost to whatever defensive stat on your Pokemon is lower. You really don't want to give it a special attack boost. Now, fighting types with good special defense are the most popular, being able to withstand the special hits that it throws at you and deal massive damage back. Stuff like Toxic Tentacruel and Encore Walrein can also work. Another strategy is leading something like Togedemaru, who has better special defense, and this will give it the attack boost. You can get some fake out chip and then switch to something that maybe is a check but would have initially gave it the wrong boost. Now, one aspect to this Porygon that helps us take care of it is Speed Control AI. This Porygon has Thunder Wave, which usually can let you get a free turn with Cherry Berry. It is likely to click Thunder Wave if you outspeed it. So if you theoretically have a good fighting type that can outspeed and 2 a KO, you can bait the Porygon to use Thunder Wave. So you attack Porygon for a massive damage, you take the Thunder Wave, the Cherry Berry removes your paralysis, and then you KO the Porygon with full HP. Now that would be the most powerful type of lead because then you can use the fighting type later in the battle as you are now full HP. So as you can see, there are tools for this Porygon, and you will likely have one in your box to deal with this, but it is far from guaranteed. And it is one of the easier Pokemon to beat on this fight. Now moving on, we have Azumarill. This Pokemon hits incredibly hard, but there are very common answers to it. Most grass types can work in this regard. Some of them, however, don't want to take a straight play rough. But Run&Bun has a lot of grass types. In particular, Route 103, Petalburg Woods, and Verdanturf Town are places to stock up on these. And if you show Fast Kill to Azumarill, it will spam Aqua Jet on you. This is an AI quirk that makes sense. If you are able to kill a Pokemon, it might as well go for a priority move to get some chip before it dies. But as the player, we can abuse that by clicking a healing move or positioning elsewhere on the weak hit. There are a lot of grass types that happen to learn the move Synthesis as well, which is perfect here. Something like Walrein with Encore can completely counter this as well. Something like Hisuian Lilligant is amazing here. Quillfish is another common Pokemon that walls this. And there are a lot of great answers. It's probably Norman's weakest Pokemon, and you'll almost always have an answer for this guy. But the next 4 is where it really gets spiced up. Doggersby is a completely different story. So Run&Bun is a game that has very little changes to Pokemon stats. It likes to keep consistency from vanilla and balance around that. However, Doggersby is a bit of an exception to this. Basically, the player has access to this Pokemon in the wild. And for whatever reason, perhaps the creator thought it would be too OP, Doggersby does not get its most infamous ability, Huge Power, at least for the player. We are stuck with Cheek Pouch, which has its uses but is significantly worse. Because of this, maybe the creator felt sorry for us, Doggersby in Run&Bun has buffed attack stat of 15. It went from 56 to 71. It's a nice slight power boost for the player, but in the AI's case, it is massive. They, on the contrary, do get huge power, essentially giving this Pokemon 142 base attack. And its held focus sash means you can't show fast kill to it. it's pretty hard to take out. If you were able to show fast kill to this, baiting quick attack would be much easier, like in Azumarill's case. Thus, this means you need a plan for taking its powerful stab moves. Baiting foul play to remedy small damage on the switch is also pretty tough. It really is a game of positioning, such as baiting Earthquake into an immunity, or Body Slam into resist, or baiting it out with a Pokemon with Gastro Acid, Entrainment, or Worry Seed. This move can suppress its ability, cutting its attack in half. This can obviously reduce the damage you take, and maybe even let you heal in front of this thing. This is also a concept that applies for Azumarill. And these specific strategies are big considerations. But a lot of the time, a lot of people will just throw a bulky grass or fighting type at it. But there are tools, at least, and there are ways to play around this guy. But on to Meloetta, and this thing is crazy. So first, I have to mention that this thing has Serene Grace. And that makes Body Slam a 60% paralysis chance, Zen Headbutt a 40% flinch chance, and Relic Song a 20% sleep chance. And at this point in the game, you have a lack of Lumberries. You don't get them at all. You can only use a Cherry Berry or a Chesto Berry, which means you can't play around both types of statuses here. Now, consistency in Nuzlocke is key, and having a consistent line for this is pretty darn rare. Baiting non-stab close combat initially from this is one idea. You essentially have to be weak to it, but if you're able to do that, it opens up KOs for a lot of things. But what's hard about this is the move Relic Song. It's a move that changes Meloetta's form to a fighting type with crazy attack and speed, which pairs perfectly with its moveset. This move unfortunately has special AI. This move from base form will always be clicked unless other moves kill you, or it always uses this move over other killing moves. And this Pokemon was basically made to have a likelier chance of clicking Relic Song, because it obviously gives a massive benefit to the AI. It's a move that you really don't want to bait. Not only does your Pokemon have a chance to be put to sleep, but Meloetta's new form after use has 128 base attack opposed to the regular form's 77. In a vacuum, you can assume that players are good enough to understand its AI quirks, and that is usually the case. And you would think you'd be able to play around it effectively, but when you view this fight in the context of having 5 other powerful Pokemon that deal massive damage, stuff like critical hits and untimely statuses can really throw a wrench in your plans, and this Meloetta can get out of control really quickly. With that said, there are answers to this thing. There are bulky psychic types like Musharna. There is Intimidate pivoting if you can consistently bait something like Close Combat into, let's say, Masquerain. There are also flying types you can match up pretty decently into this as well. A lot of the times, you'll have a Chesto Berry on your Pokemon, but then you risk getting a status by Body Slam and then full paralysis. I actually went to that once. But on a typical run, you will at least usually have a chance to beat this, whether it be through a sacrifice or through a very risky strategy. Now, moving on, Cinccino is much more straightforward. Skill Link guarantees 5 hits on its moves, and each one of its moves has a chance to flinch with King's Rock. This is a truly deadly combination, with its 115 base speed. The saving grace here is that Steel types completely resist each of these moves. Now, Steel types are not guaranteed, and even some Steel types might take too much damage and risk getting flinched down. But this archetype is common and the most obvious answer for this. The most typical answers are Togedemaru, Lucario, and Magneton. Togedemaru is a very common Pokemon that is considered one of the best Pokemon in the game, and that title is partly due to this exact fight, and the value that it has to bring. Each hit from Cinccino triggers Iron Barbs, allowing for a swift knockout, and Togedemaru can do even more on this fight, like pivoting in on Doggersby and breaking its sash. And Togedemaru is a very common Pokemon in this game. In Granite Cave, it's only a 5% chance on Room 1, and then only a 10% chance on B1F. However, on Route 110, you are very likely to get a Pokemon with the ability Static. The ability Static is an ability that has a chance to paralyze the target if they make contact with you, but it also has an out of field effect, which gives you a 50% chance to encounter an electric type from the wild. And this is very notable, as on the first floor in Granite Cave, the only electric type is Togedemaru. So if you have Static, you essentially have a 50% chance to get Togedemaru. There are also other places to get Togedemaru. Togedemaru is also 10% in Rustboro City, and it is a Pokemon that a lot of people reset for. It's not a necessary Pokemon to have, I beat the game without it, but it is a Pokemon that a lot of people will have, and it will completely invalidate this Pokemon. Another common Pokemon for the Cinccino, like we said, is Lucario. For Lucario's sake, it takes hits okay, but importantly, it gets Vacuum Wave to play around the flinch. Not only do you resist all of its hits, but you also have the super effective Vacuum Wave to a KO it. And you can safely do this without risking the flinch. And for Magneton, it's still risky as it can get flinched down, but as long as you dodge one flinch, you can Thunder Wave it to neutralize its speed, and thus it can no longer flinch you. There is also a lot of other steel types that are encounterable. There's something like Berserker who gets Bullet Punch. There's Lairon who tanks its hits alright. There's Sandslash-Alola. There's Corviknight. But what's tough is that a lot of people will have runs that have no steel type, and have to rely on something like Centiskorch for Flame Body, or Eldegoss who can use its Calm Down ability to get some speed drops. There's also a lot of other Pokemon with priority moves that can work also. I think I used something like Girder before also. There's answers like these who aren't steel types, but the fact that you can just roll up to Norman potentially having just about no answer to this thing is very terrifying. But the most infamous of Norman's Pokemon is Mega Pidgeot. It's a Pokemon that, like Cinccino and Meloetta, will outspeed just about everything you throw at it. Its coverage is fantastic, but it's less reliant on that when you realize just how powerful Hurricane is. Even if you resist Hurricane, there will be many scenarios where the damage from Hurricane will overlap with the damage of its other coverage moves, making for less consistency. And most of the Pokemon that resist flying, specifically just Steel and Rock types, not counting Electric right now, a lot of those Pokemon do not have the greatest special defense. There are a very select few archetypes of Pokemon that can deal with this. Now, we gotta mention Hisuian Arcanine. Hisuian Arcanine is the closest to a hard counter to this. It's a rock type with amazing stats that has the rare neutrality to the hidden power Grass. This lets it take hits, and it also has the moves Rock Slide and Extreme Speed. This gives it a fantastic 1-2 punch that usually kills. You click Rock Slide, and then on the following turn you outspeed and click Extreme Speed. This is a very common Pokemon that you can get early on, and a lot of people reset for it, but there are a few other answers as well. The most common archetype of Pokemon are electric types. These are the most common answers. Average runs will get at least 2 electric types, and most of them can work to varying degrees. Stuff like Luxray, Ampharos, Raichu, Manectric, and Lantern are some examples with varying degrees of risk. A lot of these electric types have paralyzing moves, which can neutralize its speed, making your team much more likely to deal with it. There are also other stuff. Some rock types can work, something like Gigalith has pretty good special defense. There are also a lot of ice types who can beat this sometimes, probably risking crits in the process. But most of the time, you just need to sacrifice to get one of these Pokemon in. And even if you do that, a crit risk or a confusion risk might be required. I'll throw in a little anecdote here. So, my second run that got to Norman had no great way of countering Pidgeot. What I was forced to do was sacrifice a Pokemon to safely get in my Ursaring. My Ursaring was then able to click Rock Tomb, dealing a good amount of damage and lowering its speed. But then I was also forced to sack this Ursaring to bring in my Revenge Killer, and it essentially demanded 2 sacrifices, so it's pretty tough. And this Mega Pidgeot is the most infamous run killer. It's the Pokemon that usually gets out of control the most and can just one-shot every one of your members if things go wrong. So, as bad as Norman is considering everything that we've went through already, what I haven't mentioned yet is that it is aided by the fact that each starter, to varying degrees, are great for Norman. Each one of these Pokemon have different tools that matches up well into varying Pokemon on this fight. Infernape is a great lead for this fight. It can also revenge kill a lot of stuff, and you can create a strategy of clicking speed lowering moves and then revenge killing with Infernape. Empoleon is an amazing answer to Azumarill, allowing it to heal to full with Life Dew when showing a fast kill. And it could even check Porygon or Pidgeot if needed. Torterra is also amazing, who similarly can kill Azumarill and Doggersby with sufficient HP. And this Pokemon is much more versatile, being able to potentially damage Meloetta as well. Overall, Norman is extremely tough. But the great part about this fight and Run&Bun in general is that even with sacrifice, a run is never dead unless you wipe. This fight might require 2 or 3 deaths, and that is a tough pill to swallow for most. But the player also has room for optimizations and risk reduction. Run&Bun gives the player 30 heart skills in total throughout the run. This limited resource is used to increase stats or relearn moves, which can be the difference between a win or a loss. And that's the most beautiful thing about this game. These resources and the capacity to sacrifice members gives players the control to increase their odds of winning. And even when situations seem dire, the Nuzlocke is only ever officially over when there's nothing remaining on your side. So it is extremely rare that you will ever go up to this fight with 0% chance of winning, and that's what I love about it. Run&Bun is a game with so much complexity and depth. It's a topic I love talking about, it's something I'm very passionate about, and I have a long list of subjects that I would love to make videos on in the future. If you guys want more content like this, let me know by liking or commenting on this video. I really appreciate all you guys watching, and I'll see you in the next one. And make sure to follow my Twitch to see me attempt crazy Nuzlocke challenges like this live. And as always, thanks for watching, and have a great day.